Okay, so I'm Malynn Utzinger. This is Tim Weitzel. We are charged with sharing with all of you a little bit about what it is like to be in the culture of Promega. And we knew that it would not be possible to do that with flat words, a flat screen. We know that cultures have to be lived, right? And last summer at a Global Leadership Summit, I heard the very lovely words that said, culture is revealed and created wherever two people gather in conversation. So think about that when you're thinking about what it means to create a culture within your organization. So what we would like to do is ask you to live a moment of silent conversation with each other. And this is going to happen through some movement. So in just a moment, there's a piece of music that's going to come on, and Tim and I are going to show you a little demonstration about how you might enter a silent conversation for just a moment through this music. So when you hear the music and everyone will stand up, everyone will move to an aisle or the front where you have a few feet of space around you. And then we would like you to catch the eye, catch the face of the nearest person to you. And as you find them, step near each other, place your right palms together, connect. Place your whole forearm together, connect a little further, and make a half turn, intertwine like a growing trunk of a tree, okay? Intertwine, catch each other's eyes, and silently to the music, make one turn together.
And don't fall off the stage.
Yeah. Through the circle of life, right? This wheel of time spins for all of us. We have shared past, present, and future to emerge into. When do we silently take it in that way and honor it? So as the music comes up, please stand up, find some space, and I'm going to let you get quiet while I say one more last little bit of this direction. Okay. This is a moving meditation and your chance to honor each other. So please take that honor with you to the first person that you turn a circle in the wheel of life with, and then move on in silence. So do a little silent bow of honor to each other, of thanks, then find the next human being near you. Come into contact and make your next circle. We'll do this as the music flows, all right?
Enjoy. Go up.
And a little bow of thanks.
Let's get it.
Well,
So I say this now.
let them get back into their seats.
Just one quick thing to say.
Like a minute, and then we'll.
So now for the bigger trick, Malynn and I are going to try to stand upright on stage after all that spinning.
And heart opening, right?
Yeah, exactly. Now, are we giving a talk now or something?
Oh,
yeah.
we're supposed to talk?
In another setting, we might ask what your responses were, what your experiences were to this, but we have just a couple things that we want to say. And one is that, and Martin talked about it, and Raj talked about it, that in deepening our encounter with the other in ourselves, with the other out there, deepening our encounter with what is different and even strange in ourselves and out there, is one of the doorways to more aliveness.
Yeah. Raj had asked this morning if it was all right to do a presencing practice, and I thought, yes, you have entered a space where it is going to be all right, but we are taking it a little bit further through that connected movement. I was going to share that some of us at Promega have the chance fairly regularly to get to our branches, and we recently came from a branch meeting near San Luis Obispo, where some of us, after the meetings, in fact, all of us went on this hike through the redwoods near Big Sur, and we got divided into groups, and some of us were with this man who was, I don't know, glowing. He could have been 40, he could have been 120, but he was glowing with life, and he said, I have been walking these redwoods for the past 45 years, and I have noticed something. These trees don't just grow upward. They grow into conversation with one another. They grow this rough external bark, and he said, look at these two trees. They were not connected a decade ago, and now they've got these lumps, these bumps in their bark reaching out for each other as though to reach for communion. And he said, this whole forest is in conversation. And when you step into the forest, you enter this conversation. Well, think about this within our lives. We pass through the people in the hallways, through the people on the streets. It's like entering a forest in which the conversation is all around us, and we have a chance to enter it. We have a chance to get still, to connect, to use the newness of the relationship to expand ourselves so we can ask differently the question, who am I? Who are you? Who are we together? And what Tim and I are going to talk a little more about down the road is this process we've been invited to about opening space between people to hold open that question, who might we be together? Some of you know the beautiful Austrian-born Israeli Jewish philosopher Martin Buber, who spoke about the I-thou relationship. And you have all just walked it together. All right. So with that, welcome, Bill.
So now I have to reintegrate myself. I don't know quite how I do that. But, this kind of basic question is, which is, who is the other? That's kind of an interesting little thing to ponder. The name of the talk here is it's a fourth space for the art of being, and I just asked permission of Malynn and Tim to give just a very short story about where did this name fourth space come from, And the building that we're in was built in 1994, and as we were building it, of course, we had to fill it with office furniture and things, and there's a few companies that provide office furniture, and one of those is Steelcase in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And in the process, of course, of trying to, get us familiar with their products, they said, we have a plane. We're going to send it to Madison. We'd love for you to come and visit with us out in Grand Rapids. We're going to make it easy for you to do that. And so I had some people here that came to me and said, Bill, they're asking for us to hop on their plane and go out to Grand Rapids. And I said, and to go look at office furniture? I said, I really don't think so. I don't want to do that. I'm pretty busy. And then a couple weeks later, they came back. The whole trip happened. And they said, Bill, you really do need to go. This is really remarkable. And so about a month later, I found myself on the plane going to Grand Rapids. And one of the discussions that we had there, and by the way, that whole experience was almost like a future memory for what we then incorporated in what we call our customer experience center, and we even created a hangar for airplanes, and we did the whole thing. And Steelcase a couple years ago came out, and they said, "Gosh, you guys have actually done it a little bit better than we did it. We've got to now go back and reinvent ourselves." But during the lunch, the vice president of research had a talk, and he had written a chapter in a book which was called The Third Space. And they just defined the third space as that area which is not home, and it's not quite like business. And so as they were talking about it, it's almost more like when you walk into a Starbucks or someplace and you have these little places you can sit and you can read and you can kind of be on a laptop or have small conversations. And so we were really inspired by that. And so you'll see throughout our buildings these third spaces. So as we began to think about, these dimensions that Tim and Malynn are going to talk about, we said, well, we need labels. We need names for things. And we said, well, we've got first space, second space, third space. Let's just keep going. We've got now a fourth space. So that's really where the idea comes from. But it takes the idea of expansion, not just into the three dimensions, but into this fourth dimension that you're going to hear about. And now I want to properly introduce Malynn and Tim, two people that have really made a transformational difference in the life of Promega, in the life of so many people, and in the community that's really becoming even more expansive all the time. Malynn Utzinger is a physician and a teacher of contemplative practices within Promega, USONA Institute, and also the University of Wisconsin here in Madison. Her work began in nutrition and integrative medicine and has grown to center on the development and well-being of the mind, and I would also say really of the full person, so mind, body, and spirit. She's moving steadily into a focus on practices that can bring vitality to the people who make up the heart and soul of business. Her many experiences include serving as the director of Women's Health Initiative for the Chopra Center in California, consulting at the Eileen Fisher World Headquarters in New York on mindfulness, Ayurvedic practices, and other mind-body practices for cultivating well-being. So we're really grateful now that we've got the opportunity of what she brings here to us in Madison and at Promega. With a PhD in depth psychology, Tim Weitzel has spent his entire 30-year career in leadership development, assessment, coaching, and organizational development. His primary goals include enhancing his clients' ability to select the best executive candidates and ensuring that their executive teams achieve operational and strategic excellence. The list of companies he has worked with includes Walmart, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Kaiser Permanente, McKesson, Marriott, Schneider National, and just to name a few. And now we can add Promega to that list, fortunately. We continue to benefit from Tim's expertise and the artful ways that he works with us. So please now officially welcome Malynn and Tim.
Maybe over to the
logistics
side.
moment here. I feel like I can't see a third of you. So, okay. And then this. Okay. There we go. All right. Will that work? Can I see you now? Okay, good. All right. And I need the slide advancer. Is that up here? Is this the one? Okay. Well, as I said, Tim and I feel honored, humbled to be here as some of the very first public carriers of the Promega story in brief. There would be thousands of stories to tell, but what we want you to be aware of, as we just briefly set the stage, is that you're sitting here in Promega headquarters, which have been here since 1978. For those of you who haven't seen the first building, you should go see the small cinder block building at the other edge of campus, about as big as my first studio apartment. That was world headquarters in 1978, Promega, and has now grown to have 16 branches all around the world. Very impressive, but this little picture up in the corner was the place you are sitting just a few decades before Promega began to grow, so you can get some sense of the flourishing here. So how, in fact, has this happened? Through some incredibly consistent values that have been in place from Promega, at Promega, right from the start. So Tim and I have been highly aware of that we were stepping into an already evolved, highly functional culture in a way that was brought out of certain masculine side values, things like quality, consistency, knowing that there had to be the kind of investment that could create a cash flow so that, as Raj had said, so that that wealth could be deployed in positive ways. There was also, however, right from the beginning, a very high emphasis placed on the feminine side of these values, on people here knowing that there was a real advantage to investing in long-term relationships, not only one-on-one between employees, but long-term relationships for the sake of relationship, not for the sake of the short-term sale with their clients. So some of this two-sided, full-spectrum masculine and feminine has been here right from the start. So with that, well, and I'll just say again that this existence of the idea of third spaces, not quite work, not quite home, places that would pull people in to have evolutionary conversations. They were practicing presencing without that particular word for it. But what comes alive when you get into a space in which you can be honored by nature, honored by the beauty of the architecture, which is its own reward, and then called into a space in which you're bringing the best of each other out. Tim and I will be talking a little bit more about how third space becomes a fourth space moving forward. Okay. All right. We also wanted you to know that where Promega has landed hasn't always come easy. It hasn't come without some pressure from the outside, some people who had other opinions. So from very early on, you heard about a period in the 80s when there was an offer for Promega to merge with another company. There was discussion about should we be bought, should we go public? And these discussions were taken seriously at that time, and there were always voices who said, whether internal employees, board members, or outside consultants, that said to Bill and others, if you, Promega, really want to remain competitive, if you want to meet your growth trajectory, you are going to have to become more commercially driven, more financially driven, more of your human brain power and energy and current finances are going to have to go to finance that. Seems like logical advice, right? However, not so much. I mean, it actually does turn out, if we're thinking about this in terms of Maslow's hierarchy or a Promega hierarchy, as we've called it for some time, yes, the finances do have to work, and that's the beautiful, solid bottom tier of that pyramid. But there has been such a beautiful investment in bringing people, their ideas, and their hearts together, even their future memories, to create visionary spaces. I have to say, this morning and yesterday, being inspired by the talks that happened here, I felt like I was in a cathedral, in a sacred space in which we were all more of ourselves, right? Inspired by the best in others, we bring forth the best in ourselves. So this is a picture of this forum last year and the kinds of connections that start to make this group family and call people back. So, yeah.
And this is just part of Pro-Mindful and just
yeah.
other activities to give you a sense of how Bill lives his life and the connections that he makes outside and so forth. I love this slide. We've used it in a number of venues already, but it's more of a concrete version of the not so much slide that Malynn just talked about, where this right here is the revenue growth curve for Promega. Amazing. From its beginning to the end of 2015. This right here is just a shot of an aggregate assessment instrument that we use for coaching and team building and cultural development and so forth. So the Hogan instruments, and typically it's used with individuals, but we also combine them with various groups. Like this is a snapshot or an aggregate of the corporate leadership team. We also just did one of the general managers, and they're very similar. Some of the absolute numbers are off a bit, but the pattern is almost exactly the same. And what, maybe they don't find it fascinating here, but I find it fascinating, and I think it's incredibly exciting. They may not be surprised by it, but that the vertical bar right there, that is the average, that's the executive average for Hogan Instruments worldwide database. Right? And so for things like power, which is traditionally what you think when you think about a corporate leadership team, when you think about the senior leadership of a company, you would think that one of their main drivers is power, and it typically is, as we see right there, but for Mega, it's significantly lower. It's one of their lowest values is hierarchical power, power over increasing scope, and so forth. Another value, I'm just going to point by the slide here. Here is the worldwide aggregate for executives around commerce, which is having your main driver be getting more money, making more profit. Worldwide average, and it is, well, it's tied for lowest for Promega. What is among the highest and is almost and is a full standard deviation away from the average is, another way to say it is love.
Altruism.
Is altruism. Service to others. Adding value to other people's lives. So I do want to admit, though, that, I mean, you can see that these are spread out, and I feel obligated to address it at least. So I don't know how statistically significant it is, but it makes a really compelling observational case or an anecdotal case, I think. So it all started with Bill Linton's unique leadership. Bill's unique leadership grew into Promega's unique culture. And Malynn and I, in talking about this, we identified 3 key things about Bill's leadership that we think were really important. We didn't vet it with Bill, so we hope that you agree, Bill. I'm not sure what's going to happen if he doesn't, but we'll have to just soldier on. So I remember one time, as soon as I started working here very early on, I was just kind of enamored with the place, and I said to Bill, "How do you do it?" And he said, "I just let it flow through me." And so it's trusting a bigger story, that business can be more than goods and services, and can be more than the pursuit of just commercial success. That trusting the bigger story, that it can be a source that guides his deep and broad intuition, and living from the belief that what makes people more alive can make a business more successful. And if a business is more successful in the right way, it can make people more alive. And then we talked about resilience and fortitude. We didn't say the not so much slides are really an illustration of the fortitude and the resilience in the face of people saying you really need to be doing this if you want to be a serious player. Not so much.
Yeah. You know, I'm just going to actually flip back for a second to tell you a story about Bill's answer. I just let it flow through me. I was thinking this morning when we were doing the presence meditation, I have nothing to defend. I have nothing to promote. I have nothing to fear. Powerful words, and all the more powerful when we say them together, right? We can feel that resonance in ourselves. And it took me for a moment to something I've witnessed now several times that happens in Bill's presence as a consciously cultivated practice here. We have these new employee meetings, and also something wonderfully named the periodic table, in which every one of the employees with a particular birthday in, say, the month of January comes to the January periodic table to be honored and to share stories. And one of the things that happens consistently from these new employee meetings onward is that Bill shares stories about how he has been moved and followed his own intuition on something. How, yes, you know, they looked at the facts, they did the logical analysis, but when it came to something vital, he allowed himself to tap into something intuitive and beyond reason. And you can see the looks on these new employees' faces. Like, I have never been, certainly not at a science research company, at an opening orientation meeting that tells me I can go ahead and be intuitive, right? You know, but it turns out he lives it. He allows it to come through him, and without fear. You know, it's also a place in which he and others are invited to share quite freely about an experimental thing they have been encouraged to try without the fear of negative repercussions if it fails, as long as Bill, the team, the person supervisor can feel that this person's energy is aligned to the good of themselves, to their self-actualization, and to the good of the greater whole of Promega and community. There is this room for experimentation, and so it happens there. I let it flow through me. So these are just a couple of beautiful pictorial examples to give you the feel of the way Promega culture expresses itself. Up on top, what you see is a barista's place, right? It looks like you're walking into Starbucks or Pete's Coffee. But no, this is a Promega trade show booth last year in which the creative people on this team said, listen, we've got these wonderful products, and you know, we know they would stack up well next to everybody else's products, but what differentiates us is the relationship we enjoy building with our customers. So let's make this a space that people want to come into and sit down with their morning mug of coffee. We scientists and salespeople, let's don our baristas' aprons and chat over these roasted beans. And so it happened. I don't know if you can see this, but that's the solutions menu up there. It's not short latte. It's, you know, this enzyme that does this for Glomax. You know, it's quite amazing. So also some projects where we gathered for things like Habitat for Humanity, and you know, this is a pretty, I think Bill's stance there typifies a company-wide feeling. So the other point we wanted to make, and we've heard various of the speakers make this point in very poignant ways, but if you really aspire to have a culture that's healthy, growing, alive, responsive, some of it does have to start at the top and come down. It must be built into the system through practices and so on. It's very true. We definitely feel that from the beginning. But if it's a unidirectional flow, it will be a problem, right? So one of the phenomenal things here is that there really is a culture of aliveness and grassroots where people take ownership for their own little sparks. And in fact, it comes through things like Tim and I will tell you about micro experiments, but it comes up from the ground up through this relationality that allows that to flourish and seems to sort of create a right balance of tension, of, you know, healthy tension between the structure needed to get things done, the structure to hold it together, and the aliveness to make sure that nothing gets stale. The voices on the outside are still heard. They can come in through their own creative door openings. So, all right.
Right. So Malynn and I have often had the conversation around what we're doing here, and we always come back to we're not creating anything new at Promega. We're just giving language to what's been here from the very beginning. And so we see ourselves in our role as being translators to what has existed since the beginning, as I just said. And so our purpose really is to build stepping stones and guide rails and handles so that Promega's unique culture can keep pace with its growth. It wants to double in growth, double in size, and that puts a lot of pressure on a culture, right, to drive that kind of growth. And so we want to make sure that the culture moving forward, that there's pathways and handles and guide rails that the culture can, hang on to and grow with the business. The other thing is there's a small model for learning. Many of you have probably heard of it, but at the very beginning, when in the learning process, we are unconsciously incompetent. Mm-hmm. We don't know what we don't know. And then we become consciously competent, right? We can do it on purpose and with help. And then, actually, we become consciously incompetent. Got it.
We know we're wrong.
Yes, right. And we know we need to learn and get our act together. No, and then we become consciously competent, right? So we can do it on purpose and with help. And then we become unconsciously competent, where it just flows naturally. Malynn and I have talked about this model in relationship to Promega, in the sense that Promega, you've been intentional to be certain, but it's just been something about who you are, and you've just been doing it. And so we feel like we're saying, okay, you're unconsciously competent at culture. Let's step back and kind of put the practices and systems and skills in place so that we make sure it's happening, as opposed to just happening because you are who you are, as we bring new people in and as the business grows.
It's just to put a personal face on that. If you have ever found yourself in a situation where you are trying to enact some quality, kindness, courage, whatever it is, and then somebody who's been observing from the outside steps in and just takes that moment to tell you, that was really beautiful what you did, or it was really courageous, it took guts, it took soul to do it. And suddenly that quality that had been coming through you in only a semi-conscious way crystallizes a little bit. You become aware of it. You want to promote it. This is the kind of thing that Tim and I hope to be doing by reflecting back to people some of the goodness we see happening already, but giving it a little structure, pouring it into conscious practice. Exercises in reflective and empathetic listening, exercises in conflict resolution coming from the grounds of nonviolence and a shared common goal. When you give people the words for a seed they feel in themselves, it comes even more alive, and you can then help to have it have reverberations out into the future. Yeah. Okay. Oh, so us. Yeah. The stories of how people get places can be special sometimes. I have a friend and teacher in the audience who says beginnings are very important. Thank you, Alan, for that. So just to share briefly what sparked Tim and me and what let us know right from the first conversations that our coming to Promega was going to be fruitful, was going to be alive. So about 17 years ago, Many of you know that Promega was involved as a very early site of a mindfulness study that was run by John Kabat-Zinn. Saki Santarelli came out. Our friend Dan Muller, he was here in the background, helped to run it on the immunology side. But it became a groundbreaking study, and one that's been cited in the emotional intelligence literature for some time. When that study was getting started, I was just moving back to Madison for one of the 4 or 5 times I've moved back to Madison. Seems to have a bungee cord effect, right? I had come from California where I was working with Dean Ornish in the mid-90s, and we were doing what he did with people with heart disease and teaching the mindfulness and that whole beautiful program. And I got connected with Richie Davidson here in Madison, and Richie said, let me bring you and a few of the medical students out to Promega to see the grounds where this really groundbreaking study is happening. And so I walked into this building and into that beautiful atrium, and there was this ginormous triptych, this art piece of some electron microscopy that had been dyed these beautiful colors, and was just, the life in these cells was popping out. But the care, the attention to the architecture, and the feeling of the people, and knowing that this was a seed where mindfulness studies were happening, just walked into this space and said, what is going on here? It was like walking into some sort of vortex. Like, this is not just an ordinary, they aren't just studying the clipping of DNA here, something else, there's real attention. And so anyway, I absorbed it all and put that in my file, and I completed medical school and residency and moved to both coasts. And every once in a while, my dad would send me a clipping from the newspaper. Promega does innovative wellness program, or Bill Linton honored for, mentoring in the community. BTCI generates another program for kids. And I just kept hearing this name Promega from no matter where, and no matter how far I moved away, I would get these little reminders about Promega. And I actually collected a little file of them. And so 3 years ago, I was living and working with my husband and 2-year-old in the Manhattan, Connecticut area. And dear friends of mine, teachers of mine, said to me, we're getting to know this man, Bill Linton. What a fascinating human being. So much good happening at Promega. We think you just ought to have a conversation with him, whether about you're coming and teaching something about integrative medicine, it would be fertile grounds there, but we just really think you should meet him. And so my friend Willow suggested a date, which happened to be the day of my mom and dad's 50th wedding anniversary, the party of which I was planning with my brother. And Helva and I just said, God, I would love to do that, but I can't. I have this important family time I want to be there for. And then I hung up the phone and I thought back to that little file where I had been getting things about Promega for the last 15 years, and Bill Linton, and I thought better of it, picked up the phone again and said, okay, I can do it, but early in the morning, can we have a breakfast meeting, And so we met, we had breakfast, and Bill asked about 45 minutes into this conversation, so Malynn, what would you most like to be doing with your life at all? I thought this was a question unique to me. It turns out Bill asks this a lot of other people. But so I had a space to answer, and I said, well, if you really want to know, I would be doing exactly what I'm doing now. I would be doing this integrative medicine one-on-one with people, dropping into the story underneath what's happening in the body. And I would have all the time I ever needed to talk to people in my space. Those of you who know me know I enjoy filling up that space with people. And I said I would never haggle with insurance ever again. So that's one little part. But then I would also have a hand in research. I'm not a primary researcher, but I very much feel the power of wanting research in consciousness to go forward. I would be a part of that. And then I paused a little bit, got a little sheepish, and I said, are you actually really asking me for everything I would want? And he said, yes. And I said, okay. I've spent some time working with Deepak Chopra. I've spent some time working with Dean Ornish. and developing my own ways, I would have a retreat center that would be inviting people from all around, business leaders, politicians, educators, community activists, students. I said, in that place, I would give them an expanded experience of themselves somehow. Because when you get a taste of who else you can be in communion by, supported by, in Sangha with others, your greater self emerges and the dialogue changes. What you think is possible changes. You come back and think you can call the president of your company, of your country. You come back and do great things. So I said we'd feed them well, we'd teach them yoga, and we would work on consciousness expanding practices. And Bill got a little twinkle in his eye and he said, I think I know a place you can do that. And within 2 weeks, my husband let me convince him that we could come move across the country again, and here we were. And it has just flourished, every single part of it. So amazing. So yeah, anyway.
Thank you. I find myself saying what I'm about to say a lot since I've started working with Promega, and it's, I just want to start off by saying I'm really honored to be here. I mean, I can't express kind of like the shake my head kind of dumbfounded feeling how I've only been working with Promega about 7 months, and I'm up here with my longtime friend and recent colleague, Malynn, sharing this beautiful and amazing story. And so I hope what we say gets at least close to what's real here. And throughout my whole life, throughout my whole professional life, I've been driven by a vision that businesses could be just what we talked about, places where people, individuals, and communities can learn and grow and become, not just about getting the job done better, but about being better human beings, better communities. And I always believed that that process in doing that could lead to greater commercial success and that ongoing circle. Back in the late 90s, I started to feel like I had a gap in my education, and I had a longing to just, I've always been really interested in psychology and mythology and spirituality, and I wanted to study it formally, so I went and got a PhD in depth psychology at a place called Pacifica Graduate Institute. Basically, I have a PhD in Jungian psychology and post-Jungian psychology. And in months of trying to figure out what I wanted to do for a dissertation, my advisor just kind of one day said, well, forget the dissertation. What do you want to do with your life? And the words, I want to build a church, popped out of my mouth, just right out. And she said, now you're talking. And we both knew that that was the thing for me. And I did my research at a place called Glide United Methodist in San Francisco. Yeah. In the heart of the Tenderloin, the grittiest, most pain-ridden, drug-ridden, crime-ridden neighborhood in San Francisco. And so the reason why I chose that is because a few years back, and I had friends that invited me to go to Glide with them when I was visiting them in San Francisco. And in the morning of the service, I walked in, and I was just blown away. Pick your demographic. And it was there represented in full range, right? Race, sexual orientation, economics, education, you name it. And they were all happy and talking with each other. And so I went in and I sat down, and people, not just the greeter greeted me, but everybody greeted me. And I sat down, and then the gospel music started, and then I just started crying, and then that was it. And I cried for an hour. And apparently that's a real common experience at Glide because the intensity of the diversity and the social mission. Anyway, fast forwarding. There's a pivotal story that, I'm laughing because I've said it, there's a pivotal story in Glide that relates to Promega, and then thinking down line into the emerging future, I could just hear everybody at Promega going, oh my God, I can't believe he's making that connection. But just hear me out and I'll clarify things. But one of the pivotal stories in Glide's history was back in the late 60s, they had a love-in, and Cecil Williams, the really powerful black minister at Glide, offered Glide as a safe haven. And one night he was making his rounds, and in making his rounds, he saw a couple of couples coupling, and carrying the words "love-in" to the fullest carnal possibilities. And then he also saw at the end of the hallway in big bold letters, and there's a pretty heavy curse word coming up, but it's apropos to the story. In big bold letters, spray painted on the wall, it said, "Fuck the church." And, in most situations, that would have been the clue for the minister to say, "Get the cops, get these people out of here." But Cecil being Cecil, tells the story this way. He says, "You know what? Fuck the church is right. It's the only way we can make it pregnant with new life." And he said that was a pivotal moment about how he saw the church. The church is not about continuing some theology and rejecting everything that doesn't agree with it. It's about embracing all of life in its messiness and its grittiness, our hope, our ecstasy, our raw and edgy things about us that normally get marginalized in most places, but unfortunately, especially churches, right? And so, again, fast forwarding, I realized that it wasn't a real church that I wanted to build. It was a metaphorical church. And then about a year ago, through Malynn, I met Bill. And I discovered that Bill also wanted to build a church, again, metaphorically, not literally. But with the same idea as Glide, maybe significantly toned down a little. But certainly no love-ins happen here. Maybe from the heart, I don't know.
We just had a love-in, right?
Yeah,
oh my
that's
gosh,
right.
This morning. Oof.
But the idea here is that, like, one of our mandates is, and we weren't told to do this, we just know not to do it, is create a lot of form and rigid structure. Because being responsive to the moment and encountering the other in each other, in the market, in ourselves, and being responsive and flexible and fluid with that is so central to everything that happens here. And the reason why that can survive is because there isn't this narrow, we're about making a profit, and this is who we are, and this is only what we do. It's a vessel, and well, going back, one more thing about Glide, and I'll turn it over to Malynn, is Glide said it began to see itself as a vessel that held people who were struggling for new life. And for Glide, that's everybody, if you're alive. Even the uber white people, maybe even especially the uber white people in Pacific Heights who have, or uber healthy. They're uber white too, I'm sure, but I meant uber wealthy. We are all, if we're living, we're all pushing a growing edge, right? If we're living, if we're not walking dead, we are struggling for new life. And that, in a sense, is really what Promega is. It's a place that says, one of the things that I've noticed is it's okay to fail here, but I get a real clear sense that it's not okay to sell yourself short.
Yeah.
It's not okay not to dream big and go for it.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly enlivening and exciting.
Yeah.
So, fourth space, what is it? And did you want to go back to that slide?
Oh, do we want to do that clip or skip it?
Let's skip it, because
Okay.
I think just from time's sake.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for letting us have a conference. Better to apologize, right, than ask permission. So fourth space, what is it? Bill told you a little bit about what it is, but when we think about trying to define it, we never can. And we actually have come to accept the fact that that's a good thing, right? Because if we're talking about building the culture that we're talking about, it's always growing. It's like a cumulus cloud that's billowing, right? And moving toward the future. But what our current efforts are about are giving it language to focalize what exists as felt experience and guiding wisdom. And what we want to do within that is to create firm but flexible frameworks, again, stepping stones, handles, that help bring the culture forward as Promega doubles in size.
You know, I'm just going to take a chance to say a minute more about that word you saw up there, focalize. Do any of you know what a focalizer is? Yes. And I was just going to honor you, Bob, for being the person who taught me. Two people in this audience have shared with me some experience and some bits of knowledge about the Quaker culture over the years. Bob, in particular, taught me very recently this word focalizer, which ended up feeling to me so relevant to what we're trying to do here, and I hope some of you who are inspired may adopt it. So you probably know, many of you would know, that a Quaker culture is a very non-hierarchical place. There aren't a lot of named directors, people of permanent given authority, or elections over. You also may know they have some lovely ways of honoring those who are steeped in their spirituality, steeped in their tradition. They're called heavy in spirit. It's a really nice thing. But once in a while, when a person is needed, when a situation arises that calls for some sort of guidance, calls for a form of leadership, even if that person isn't an elected official, there will be someone that steps forward, is given the authority through a small group of consensus to become the focalizer of that conversation. And that person has no illusion about holding ultimate authority, about keeping that position forever, but they are willing to build the bridge for that moment, to step in with a spontaneously felt and offered leadership, sense of guidance, offering from their soul and from their experience, and they become the focalizer there. But of course, only drawing on the wisdom already inherent in the community, trusting that it's there and that the rest of the community will be also there to catch them, and somebody new, when the next situation arises, would become the next natural focalizer. So we thought, you know, we went through some interesting conversations about what do we say we're doing? You know, we don't want to come in like consultants with a preformed message, this is who you need to be. We want to come in and listen, observe, but also catch the light that's happening already there, mirror the best in people. We know we have, as human beings, we have these amazing things called mirroring neurons, right? And it's how we become relational. It's how we're wired to do that. Well, focalizing is just one step further in that naming. You can mirror and then you can help to focalize. Here is a beautiful quality in you. Let's draw it forward. You know, here is an area where I feel you trembling. Let's create some space around that to explore. So focalizing. Anyway, all right. So I have to get up and see these words here so I'm not craning. Really what we wanted to do with this slide, we could have drawn it a little differently had the words fit. It really could have been drawn like a series of concentric circles, where what we wanted to say is that the qualities that are necessary for businesses to operate, superior products, qualities, clear direction and goals, outstanding commercial success, you know, all of these necessary structured masculine qualities exist. You'll find them here. It's impressive what Promega has invented, what Promega has commercialized, how it's brought into the world. But there is this bigger concentric circle around it called the space of fourth space. And just a couple of weeks ago, we had one of Promega's lead chemists from PBI, Pancho, sitting here, gave us this amazing analogy and said, you know, fourth space feels to me the way I would talk about an electron orbital, right? An electron orbital it's a potential space. There's no definitive line in space. You can't define where that electron is in any moment, but its path holds open a space for an entire structure to be born and to be reinvented in every moment as that electron moves. And we were like, right on, that is fourth space. And so when you move over to the second column, it also grows bigger into an environment that supports people in their fullest self-actualization, the company's self-actualization, remains open to being surprised and reinvented. Those of you who've been over in the Feynman building, you can attest to its beauty. And if you haven't heard already, Feynman was built on a blue ocean strategy. In other words, the customer didn't yet exist, or they existed in the world but hadn't yet related with us in the way that was necessary. But Bill and some others had a vision that says, if we create this highly competent space, amazing space for this to happen, the relationship will come, the commerce and the relationship. So open to being surprised and reinventing itself, opening into that blue ocean where no one else is sitting yet, but we're willing to go adventure and invite the relationship and structure to be grown. So it is a container for ever-growing life and aliveness, vibrates with a positive resonance. These are things you can feel too. I'm just going to step ahead of ourselves for a second because this word resonance popped up. One of the things that Tim and I try to teach through the seminars that we do with small groups and teams are about the basic building blocks of mindful self-awareness and other awareness. And we can come so far in life without having ever learned to pay attention to the basic physical feeling of resonance or not, or its lack. And so it's one of the things we ask people to stop and do through that pause created through mindful activities and paying attention to the body that you begin to feel when you are in resonance with your calling and with others. And when it isn't there, rather than to stay collapsed or collapsed further, to begin to build the concrete skills to open up a space, to stay in that black, undefined space between the old thing that isn't working and the new thing trying to emerge, where you simply have to trust a resonance that's there before the rest of the dialogue, before the structure. So we pay attention to that word resonance a lot. And then, recognizing all of our imperfections, we didn't want to technologically throw too much at you, so I'll just let you do a little thought experiment on this last one. Remember the voice of Leonard Cohen singing, "Forget your perfect offering. Everything is cracked. It's how the light gets in." We try to live that here.
So we'd like to move through these fairly quickly. Is that okay with you,
Yeah,
Malynn?
totally.
Because we want to give you at least a brief look at how we're going about moving forward, what we're actually doing. But so again, just some more four-space qualities. You can read these yourselves, really. Can everybody read them okay? Yeah, so if I can just talk about them and you'll get them okay. But the heart of all of them really is about breaking out of rigid, solidified identities. And they're all about trusting the fact that there is a bigger story that surrounds us, and that the way that we've approached business, the way that we've approached life in terms of a concrete, a reinforced concrete ego, and continually reinforcing that ego. It's about creating an ego that is healthy and firm, but has intentional cracks, intentional spaces to let new light in. And these qualities are really what that's about. And so the fourth space is holding all that is us and creating new meaning. It's essentially, I would say, listening into the emerging future that Martin talked about. But the other thing that I do want to highlight or speak to is a key thing about fourth space is giving positive meaning to the struggle that goes into this. Right? This isn't a weekend workshop where you can go get dipped in something and you're transformed. It's hard work. And one of the things that tends to happen out there, in the world, in our world, are the struggles and the pain and the setbacks around that work tend to be demonized, and they get marginalized. And it's how can we, collect ourselves together really quickly and get back to the way things are supposed to be. What we're trying to do with the fourth space is saying, yeah, it's a mess. Let's hang on to it and see what emerges. And so the fundamental tool, really, that we use is emotional and social intelligence. That's at the heart of everything that we are doing, and that's really the ground that we are putting the seeds in and cultivating. So the way we're looking at it is, and Malynn spoke to this a little bit a moment ago, but we're starting with the basics. Pure emotional intelligence. Understanding our feelings, understanding our experience, being able to tune into and understand what some psychologists call a subtle body, that vibration within that isn't obvious but can lead us to deep truth in ourselves and in others. And so we teach classes. I'm getting a little bit ahead, but we're creating centers of excellence, working with people, helping them really deepen their skills so that we can drive this into the business and have Promega employees be the change agents instead of consultants. And then we bring this up, so bring this awareness up and teach the ability of self-control using willpower. I'm just hesitating because there's a great book. What is it called? I forgot.
Oh, The Willpower Instinct.
The Willpower Instinct. If you haven't read that yet, please read it. But the idea of being able to have the willpower to act in the direction of our higher selves, our deeper calling. And then how that gets channeled into the fruit of the tree, which is what we do in business and how we get things done. Decision-making, planning, having dialogue and conversations, problem solving, and so forth.
Yeah.
Anything you wanted to add?
I do have something, but why don't you go ahead? I can pop it in later.
So this is our fundamental goal in building fourth space is to drive enthusiastic engagement and the capability for the work down into the organization, down into the business, from the C-level to the first-line workers. And our approach is a combination of, as Malynn said, top-down and grassroots, a combination of appropriate structure, appropriate processes, but then also just creating, again, centers of excellence where people learn new practices. People can experiment with new ways of being and try things out and be supported if it fails, right? So it's a combination of linear and nonlinear. We talked about the emotional intelligence, talked about establishing practices. And we want what we do to be able to be influenced locally. Promega has divisions around, business units around the world, and what we do here works for them in some ways and not in others. The essence of what we're talking about is a more psychologically mature way of being, and that's our stake in the ground. We want people to have more awareness, more self-awareness, more other awareness. We want people to have more sensitivity and skill and discipline about channeling these skills. But the form that expression actually takes, we're not as interested in.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Was the for the Pilobolus people? Do you know this beautiful dance troupe? incredible. We just wanted to give you a flavor of some of the actual programs and practices that we are using to try to structure this. And so what happens with me is that I show up in moments and like to fill them based on the stimulus and sense I get from people right then and there. And it can work beautifully. When I stand next to Tim, he's always the guy that goes, yeah, and people need structures, practices, words they can hang on to. So it's like this wonderful yin and yang. And so out of that came this idea of some key principles, which were short phrases that would represent to people simple, basic practices that we could all do when showing up in conversation with one another in order to enliven that space, make it more respectful, make the listening empathetic, honor and invite diverse perspectives. So we have said these are going to be little phrases, little reminders people can turn to when they're stuck that'll be propagated throughout the business. The Climate Catalysts is a wonderful new group that we have started of people, leaders, people from all different portions of the business that we identified, but also they volunteered. They volunteered their busy time to come together and say, this emotional and social intelligence piece matters to us. And we are as interested in finding out how to do this well as knowing how to do the rest of our jobs. So we are just in our first 6 or so months of meeting together and going through learnings. One of the big ones we're on right now, and I just want to say it, it's so basic but so universally needed. We're talking about defensiveness in this thing, and no matter how far evolved you are, no matter how long you've been meditating, been being a good person, defensiveness comes up in us. And it is one of those things that contributes to that terrible statistic we've seen now at least 3 or 4 times in these presentations of why 70% of the people are either only barely engaged or actively disengaged. People get defensive about what they're doing, what they're protecting. And I remember one day when we said to Penny, we're going to be working on some change management. And I could see her face just wince a little bit. And I thought, okay, there's something happening underneath this. I have to go find out what it is. So I pulled her aside at lunchtime and I said, is there some history about like teaching change management here that I should know about, or what's going on? And she kind of sighed and she goes, I know it's necessary, but the problem is when you get many people in talking about change management, you get other people identified who are supposedly those folks resistant to change. And she said, I hate the way it's handled. People forget that resistance to change is often them protecting something precious underneath, whether it is some essential value that is critical to Promega or critical to their well-being that just is not being honored. And at that point, I sighed this huge, tremendous relief and said, oh, wait, okay, so I'm working with a Jungian psychologist, and I believe in people's precious interiors. This is what we're going to do. We're going to get in there and help people actually feel into the value of that precious thing they're protecting, and so that it can come out and become a productive part of what's going on here. So anyway, we go through those kinds of things, and we invite people to do micro experiments. Take this back to your team and see, can you do an exercise in which you take a current conflict and work it through a real listening core transformation? You find the preciousness. Coaching, consulting, I feel like I don't even want to name all these. We have a mindfulness program that's now 1.5 years old that people are attending. And we decided, how many minutes? Am I at the end of my minutes? Okay.
Can I add something quick?
Yes, please.
The essence of it is just building skills around emotional intelligence and creating people who can bring it into the organization is the essence of that list as I see it.
Yep. I don't even think we need to go to the last 2 slides. Do you mind if I share the Ram Dass closing, my
Please,
Ram Dass? So a while ago, a few of us from Promega had the lucky chance to go sit with Ram Dass. Yeah, amazing, amazing. And we got to ask him, what was it on your journey that drew you alive? And he kept saying, my guru, my guru, my guru. And he had such amazing stories about it. You couldn't help but honor him for this relationship that brought him alive. But I thought, okay, we're coming back to Promega. We're coming back to the corporate setting. We can't have a guru here. We'll send people running the other way if that's what we say, right? So I got thinking about it, and I said to Ram Dass at some point toward the end of our meeting, what do you think? Could it be true that in the modern world, where corporations have to do it in more neutral language, non-religious language, could it be that Sangha could be the replacement for the guru relationship? And he smiled and said, yes, I think that's it. And so it's really what we're trying to do here. Yes. Everything about it is to bring people into the Sangha, the community practice where these things get amplified, flavored, and resonance. We become in resonance with each other. So thank you. Yeah.